Tonight we're going to be giving a brief update on the status of the village's review of our stormwater system. We're not going to be presenting the findings as the work is still being finalized. As you know, this is very complex work that involves analysis of a patchwork of a number of small and unique localized flooding issues that in some cases intersect and in some cases do not, as well as the identification of a number of unique stormwater improvements that in some cases may intersect and some may not. All of this depends on the accuracy of a very detailed engineering model with many, many assumptions. So why is this so difficult and time-consuming, and why is this taking as long as it has? There's a lot of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is that we're finding that almost all of the low-hanging fruit in terms of our stormwater system improvements have already been taken advantage of. Tonight, we're going to be telling you, or I'm telling you, that we've invested in today's dollars $140 million in our stormwater system since the 1960s. $140 million. And these improvements have proved to be successful and impactful for the vast majority of our residents. But the 2011 flood exposed some additional localized weaknesses in our system. As you know, the village received reports that about 200 of our homes flooded during that event. And while we could never build a system that could handle that kind of storm, it still was a learning experience for us and an opportunity to explore further enhancements. Tonight we're going to be telling you about how the study that's currently underway attempts to identify and define those problem areas and how it's going to determine some possible improvements. And most importantly, I think we're going to be discussing how the plan to present this information, once finalized, how we're going to approach the decision-making process. So with that, I'll let Scott take it from here.
Thank you, Manager Recklouse, and good evening. Mr. Mayor and Board of Trustees, thanks for being so patient and waiting for this. We are doing a very brief overview of where we've come from, and I think one of the important things to keep in mind is that this village has been very active in its addressing of flooding issues in the past, and I think that's something that has led us to this point where the area is impacted even with a storm of the magnitude we had on July 23rd, 2011. We're in the scope of the percentage of the village, we're relatively small. We've been improving the system in the village since 1963. In 1967, the village board commissioned what was called the Peterson study, and that was the beginning of a couple of very important decisions that were made. The board at that time decided that the combined area of the village, which is the older part of the village between Palatine Road and Central, would be connected to the deep tunnel project. That project was on the books and was underway as early as the late 60s, and a connection to the deep tunnel was made in 1977. A second connection was made in 1995. Why this is significant is that of the two studies, the CDM Smith study that looks at the combined sewer areas, takes that into account. In other words, the village made a decision not to separate the stormwater from the sanitary sewers and went forward from there. And it's very important to understand that all these projects took that into account and went in one direction. And that was a fork in the road that was very important because it kind of changes how you solve flooding issues in those areas. Most recently, in 2001, after an event, I believe it was October 13th, 2001, we had 3.29 inches of rain in a 12-hour period, and the board commissioned a study by Metcalf and Eddy, and at that time the solution for that flood study was for the village board to begin the overhead sewer program, because all those areas that were identified in the Metcalf and Eddy study, there were some 53 reports of flooding, and the 5 or 6 areas that were studied were all in the combined sewer area. So we have not talked yet about the Burke study, which is in the separate areas, and I'll get to that in a moment. But this Exhibit A is shown here shows the history of Arlington Heights and all the areas that have had sewer improvements, as summarized by Manager Recklaus and by myself, since 1967 to improve situations in neighborhoods. Wilkie Kirchhoff, numerous relief sewers, numerous underground detention vaults. Remember, we have inlet restricted sewers in these areas so that water is held in the street on purpose so that it doesn't go in people's basements. And that's not something a lot of people like to hear, but it's a decision that was made, and it is sound engineering, and it's being done currently in other communities. So we've had some disagreements with residents about that, who want to say that that's not up to date and that's outdated, and that's just simply not true. Skokie, Wilmette, Evanston, Chicago, especially Evanston and Chicago, have installed these type of inlet controlled systems within the last 2 to 3 years. So it is not anything new. So this is just an exhibit that kind of shows that, we've not been asleep at the wheel, and the majority of the town has had some type of improvement at some time. The overhead sewer program, as I related earlier, was started in 2004, and as of now, we're up to $7,500 or 50% to help those residents. Again, this is in the combined sewer area that is generally between Palatine Road and Central Road. There are exceptions in those areas where there are some separate sewer areas on the fringe, but the majority of that is combined sewer. July 23rd, we did not commission these studies to solve July 23rd. It's simply not practical. What we did was we looked at the design storm that all of the separate sewer areas were designed to handle, and applied that to the combined sewer area. So the RFP for the CSTA was given to CDM Smith, and the RFP for 7 problem areas that were in separate sewer areas, which 5 of those were north of Palatine Road and 2 were south of Central. That report was given to Christopher Burke and Associates, and this is the 7 areas that were covered by the Christopher Burke study that is nearing completion. This is the area that we consider the combined sewer tributary area, and this is the area that is being studied by CDM Smith. That study is a little less close to completion because we are working with the consultant to make sure that we have good options for the village board to consider when it comes to improvements or moving forward in order to address these issues. So the plan is to finalize these 2 reports. As I said, the Burke study is extremely close to completion. CDM Smith study still needs some discussions between staff and CDM Smith staff. We plan to have meetings with the public and with the board in January with both of those consultants. Remains to be seen whether or not those will be on separate nights. They may include breakout groups for different neighborhoods and problem areas. We haven't really written that script yet to decide exactly how we'll communicate that information, and I think that's something that we'll be discussing with Manager Recklaus going forward, and certainly he would take into account the opinions of the board as well. And then in February, we would plan for some type of wrap-up discussion with this reminder that there is no current revenue source for stormwater improvements that are in the several $100,000 range or above. The overhead combined sewer system cost-sharing program is sufficiently funded. I can't remember how many homes have taken advantage of that, but it's over 100. And so we still promote that program and think it needs to be part of any solution. But As far as the wrap-up discussion goes, our timing is laid out this way so that the board will have time to consider the improvements that these studies come forward with to decide on whether or not we might include something in the capital improvement program, which I believe is scheduled to start discussions and hearings sometime in March or April. That's all I have.
So, I mean, the bottom line is, and we're trying to keep this brief, we're really looking, we want to have a process that involves public involvement. We think it's important that the findings are presented in such a way that residents can see what the impacts would be and what the model says about the problems in their own, each in their individual neighborhoods, so they can validate the model and understand the nature of the problems that are occurring and the potential impact of improvements. We want to make sure that everyone is going into this with their eyes open. This will not be an easy discussion. We are going to have to weigh the costs of any potential and the potential benefits of all the various alternatives, with the full understanding that any improvements will not prevent flooding in all circumstances. And so given the heavy meeting schedule this fall with the budget, the annual financial report, the tax levy, the upcoming decision on our solid waste contract, not to mention the current uncertainty with the state of Illinois' budget, we didn't think it was feasible to begin this discussion in any meaningful way before the holidays. And so this additional time will allow us to get the model and potential improvement concepts as fine-tuned as possible. We are going to be putting some additional information from this presentation and this discussion up on the website and promoting that to interested residents in the next few days so the public has the latest information. But we wanted to give you guys an opportunity where we can kind of check in where we are in this project. We know it's something that's been generating a lot of interest, and give you the opportunity to ask us any questions that you may have.
Questions from the board? Trustee Rosenberg.
Is there any possibility that we think that we can even start on any of this next year?
Depending on what it is, I think as Public Works Director Shirley indicated, that there are components. We do have some money budgeted with our regular stormwater program. We may be able to prioritize some of that work in some ways with the engineering work or what have you to do the improvements, but also looking at ways to alter the formula potentially with the overhead sewer program. There are some possibilities, but the big thing is for major improvements that could be considered, we don't have funding for major improvements, just for kind of the tweaking and the planning to get the ball rolling if the board were to be inclined to do so.
So ideally, we'll have, size and cost and potential time frame that all these would take when this report is completed then by each specialist?
Yes.
Trustee Sedor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just quickly, I attended a meeting in Mount Prospect in the mayor's stead regarding all this, and I forwarded the information to you, Mr. Recklos, but just for the record, so much money was talked about that was supposedly available in grants and for all this flooding. Are we exploring that, or is it too early to explore that, or what is the truth behind all that?
We intend to explore it. We need to identify potential improvements before we can look for grants, but looking for grants is absolutely part of the strategy. I think it behooves us obviously to look for as much outside money as we can before looking at the money, additional money within the community.
Thank you, Mayor.
Trustee Scaletta.
Two questions. The first one is, actually several questions. We had about 200 people report that their basements were flooded.
We had 200, and I think it was 23 or 234. It's in the report.
Right.
Reports of basement water damage. And I think what needs to be made clear is that includes basement backup through a sewer system. But on July 23rd, 2011, I have overhead sewers and I had water in my basement because drain tiles could not keep up. Some pumps could not keep up with that rain intensity and that amount of rain in that period of time. And unfortunately, most people were asleep as well, because it all started happening around midnight, 12:30, and then really it was over by 6:30 or 7 a.m., and a lot of people didn't even know it until they woke up and the water had receded. So, I mean, it's not just basement backups. This is a storm event of the magnitude where we don't know how many sump pumps failed, how many couldn't keep up, how much was just seepage because of groundwater elevation.
The window wells.
Well, we know where we had overland structure flooding, and those were not numerous locations in the combined sewer area. Those were some of the locations that are in the separate sewer areas. Remember that the CSTA study is just studying for basement backups. The other studies are studying those 7 areas north and south, are overland, issues where street flooding or flooding outside is threatening or entering homes through window wells and whatnot. But that did occur in some in the combined sewer area as well during that particular event.
So aside from us notifying all those people that notified us that we're going to be having these meetings in the future, we definitely will be doing that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then we're probably going to start seeing little dots, like we did with the Emerald Ash Borer, that might be able to show some hot spots?
Well, we have identified within, like I said, there's 7 areas identified for the Burke study. Those are separate sewer areas. There's 7 or 8, I think up to the letter G, areas that are identified within the combined sewer area as the hottest spots. And CDM Smith, with the use of the model, is putting together proposals for relief sewers or detention vaults or other options to deal with that water.
Okay. All right. I appreciate the work you guys have done thus far. And, when you start taking a look at this document that you just gave us, it just, it reminds me of how big our village is and how, this isn't just an isolated area that we're having one problem with. There's different problems in different parts of the village at different levels. And so it's just, thank you for the update.
Anything further? I just add my 2 cents. This is an important process, an important project, so I want to stay on course on this. Even though we may not have funding, probably won't have funding, I want to make sure that we get some results here so that we can report to the community that we've been promising. So let's stay on track.